welcome to Textiles and Tea. I'm Kathy Group. I am the advertising manager, and I get to be your host today. Today, our sponsor is Barbara Decker. Barbara is another one of our Textiles and Tea angels. Thank you so much, Barbara, for donating money to support this episode of Textiles and Tea today. We do appreciate it. If you have questions, they will be at the end of the hour, the last 15 minutes. Please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. We love your chats. Those are great comments, but I can't always see those. But if you're in the Q&A, I will see those questions. Today, we have Mary Burgess. Mary is an Australian hand weaver with a focus on memory and mourning. She runs the Woven Memories project from her studio in Melbourne. Mary has partnered with the Hong Kong University of Social Work Department, researching the impact of hand weaving on grief. She's been an artist in residence in hospitals. She's exhibited in Paris, Rome, and in the US. She designs and weaves items to honor beloved family members who've died. She deconstructs their textiles, and she works with the families to weave something that speaks of the life of the person and into the future. Examples include cushions, baby blankets, bedspreads, scarves, and it's a very transformative process at work, both in the material and the psychology, as the new fabrics are created from cloth worn in a past life, encompassing experiences that can be held and contemplated without words. Welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Kathy. Nice to see you.
Thank you for being on here today. What you do is very unique, and I'm excited to talk with you about that. But first, the most important question is, what is your favorite tea?
I knew this was coming. Licorice.
Licorice? Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, licorice tea. I guess I never thought of that one.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
It's really lovely. Try it sometime.
I'm going to have to. I'm adding that to my tea list. How did you get started in weaving in fiber?
Well, my father worked in the textile industry. I think I got a little frame loom for my 10th birthday, and I imagined I was going to weave myself a scarf. I think I did about 2 inches and gave up. Then at school, we had an amazing craft teacher, and I wove a cellophane clutch bag on a spaced warp. I wish
Cellophane?
I still had it. Cellophane sort of scrunched down into a spaced warp, and it was lined with satin. I really wish I still had it. And then I trained as an occupational therapist. We did weaving then. And then I taught in the occupational therapy program, and I was asked to teach weaving when I had very little experience of it. They had 6 floor looms, and I only had 8 hours to teach weaving over a period of time. So they sold the floor looms on my advice, and I bought one. And so I was committed from then, and I've still got that floor loom many, many years later. So that got me going.
That is an interesting story. I got my loom from an occupational therapy program, that same thing. With the short stays in hospitals, weaving just didn't, a big floor loom didn't work into the program well, and so they sold them. So I'm well aware of occupational therapists and the wonderful things they do. And I think we're going to hear about this today too. So your weaving is very unique, like I said. Would you describe what you do as part of Woven Memories a little bit more than what I've already read?
Yes. So it's very much word of mouth how people find me, but usually someone has lost a family member, they've kept some clothes or some fabrics, or even in some cases letters and papers. And so they come to me and we talk through what they'd like me to work with as a weaver. I take the things apart, either by cutting or tearing. So there's always a sort of destruction of the fabrics or clothes before they then get woven into a new item. I always do quite a lot of sampling. I'll talk about that perhaps later. to make sure that my client is happy with what they're going to get. And then I weave something, and I weave lots of different things, as you said in the introduction. And I love a new challenge. You know, someone arrives with clothes, and I always have this reaction of, I've no idea what I'm going to do here. And this daunting feeling of how can I honour the person who died and honour the clothes or the fabrics. So there's always that sense of, oh my goodness, this is huge.
Mm.
Yeah.
A little pressure, huh?
Yes, but at the other side of it is I'd never pressure myself time-wise. So I basically say to people, it will take as long as it takes. So I don't do, there's a baby due in 6 weeks. Can you whip up a baby rug with grandpa's clothes? I go, I can make the baby rug, but not under pressure.
Well, good for you. That's taking care of yourself. I like that. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I understand you began doing this when, unfortunately, you were dealing with your own loss of someone very special that you loved.
Yes.
When that happened, did you have like an aha moment of, oh, this is what I want to do? Or did you kind of gradually come to realize this was a way that you could help yourself, help others to do this?
Yes. It was really a kind of stage process. I realized that I was stuck in my grief after my partner died after a couple of years. And I did some work with an art therapist whose name's Nona Cameron. She has her own website. And we did 6 really intensive 2-hour sessions. And at the end of that, I did a tiny little textile that was stitched, and it included some furnishing fabric from one of my partner's dining room chairs that the fabric can split on dining room chairs. It was a brocade, and I had this sense that this is the beginning of something new, but I had no idea what that meant or anything about what that something new could be. And then I got a studio space in a building in Melbourne called the Nicholas Building, which is full of artists and craftspeople and jewellers and movie makers. And I was pretty intimidated at first. And I made a little book about my partner, which was mainly stitched, but I also did some very tiny little woven textiles that are in the book. The book's tiny. I don't think you can see it. It's behind me on the shelf somewhere there. So that was the next step. Then I went and did a weaving course, the first of 6, with Liz Williamson, a very renowned and esteemed Australian weaver. And she very much encourages people to experiment. And so I decided at that point I wanted to make something for myself with my partner's clothes. And so I went away to the country to this weaving workshop, and I took some of that same furnishing fabric with me. I don't think I had any other of his clothes at that point with me. And I thought I wanted to make some sort of a cape. And then, so I made a little prototype, which is, we'll talk about this later, but that's the little prototype is in an exhibition at Cornell University at the moment. I would never have imagined that it would have such a life. But I realised at the end of that workshop that if I made a cape, I was never going to wear it. So I gradually came to the conclusion that I needed to make myself a blanket. And one of his expressions when I was not coping at all in life was, "I will mind you," which I just loved. And so I thought, I'm going to make a blanket that's like, "I will mind you." So I did. It took me a year. I did 2 lengths and sewed them together. And they also are in this exhibition at Cornell at the moment, or the blanket is. And one of the things there were 2 things when I finished the blanket. The first one was I have done all this work. You should come back by now.
Oh.
At a very sort of, you know, basic internal level, it was like, look what I've done. Why haven't you come back? But at another level, it was just so comforting. It was just, I just couldn't believe the level of comfort. And so I kind of went, I could do this for other people. It was like this, and that was the light bulb moment. But that was after quite a long trajectory. And so then I went to it just happened that at that point there was a conference in Melbourne called Big Hearted Business, run by a wonderful Australian singer called Claire Bowditch. And it was all about how do you create a business that's about heart. And I thought, oh, this is probably a good starting point for me. So I went to the conference, and I, you know, wrote a little business plan. And then the next thing I did was ask 3 friends who were grieving in different ways if they would be sort of volunteers, and I would make something for them for free. And that in myself, I thought I'm going to take lots and lots of notes and, you know, think about what kind of process works in this. And so I did that. And then that was sort of like a year of, if you like, the development of my business. And at the end of that, I wrote a paper on my work process and gave it at a grief and bereavement conference. And I had an exhibition at the same time. And that was sort of how I got launched. And from the talk at the conference and the exhibition, I was asked to exhibit in Paris. And that's when I got an invitation to work with Professor Chow at Hong Kong University. So that all came out of having a year of developing the business. Yeah, so it was a long process.
Well, I'm curious about something. You said that, and I'm probably using the wrong word. I'm probably hearing it in my head a certain way, but you were talking about how doing that was comforting. Is that a right word?
Yeah.
Was it the weaving was the comforting part, or the end product was the comforting part, or both in their own way?
I think that one of the things that Nona Cameron said to me when I was starting to do this project was, she said, document, 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 just write down exactly how you feel. So, you know, I'd tear up a shirt, and so I'd write about when he wore the shirt and how I felt about tearing it up and how I felt about weaving with it. So I approached the actual weaving of the blanket with a kind of really intense internal kind of process that I then journaled. But I think the real comfort, that was almost like a working through, if you like, of my feelings. The real comfort was the finished product. And it's still I'm missing it at the moment because it's at Cornell. Because I have it on my bed all the time. It's I don't know how to describe this, but it's lost some of its intense potency over time. But it still has, you know, it's got his clothes. It's got some of the jacket I wore at his funeral. It's got sheets that we slept in. So I can kind of go back to, oh, look, there's that little bit of his T-shirt at any moment. No one else would know. And that's the other thing I like about it, is it doesn't scream clothes of someone who died. It just looks like a blanket that's been woven with torn fabric. But I know what it means.
Right. I cannot imagine how comforting that must be.
It is.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, besides doing, how can I say this? One thing I noticed is it felt like you gave people another option of either, we stuff stuff in the closet, or you pack it away and you just don't do anything with it because you can't, you don't want to, whatever, or you either throw it out or give it to Goodwill or whatever. So it's nice that there's this third option, isn't there?
Yes, yes. And I'm conscious, this is an audience of weavers, and this morning I got a message on my website from someone who said, I've got all these family clothes, I'm going to weave with them now, I've worked out what I'm going to do.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's great.
Yes, so yeah, I think it is really, really difficult to, that a friend of mine's in Scotland at the moment. She's not a weaver. It's her mother's funeral today. And then she will be spending 2 weeks emptying her mother's house before she comes back to Australia. And I was talking to her husband last night, and I said, get her to keep some clothes and bring them back. Just tell her, don't throw everything away. This is not for everyone, but for people who do want to, in some way, stay connected through clothing, I think it's a good option. Well, I'm pretty committed to it.
Well, you've also seen the effects of it. I mean, it's not like you don't know, you haven't seen it firsthand, right?
Yeah. And I've had some sort of heart-rending feedback from other people. It was a young woman who her aunt commissioned me to make a baby blanket with her sister's clothes. So this woman's sister had died of breast cancer at 62, very suddenly. It was very late discovery, very short time till she died. And a couple of years later, this woman's daughter was pregnant. And so her aunt thought that it would be lovely to have a blanket with her mother's clothes for the baby. And so I wove this. So this was a kind of like, not directly, my client was the aunt, not the young woman who'd lost her mother. And so then she got the blanket, and then I didn't hear from her at all for 6 months. And I thought, oh no, it didn't go the way she wanted. And so I emailed the young woman and said, I hope everything's gone well, and that you like the blanket. And she'd had a very difficult time with the birth and postnatal depression. That's why she hadn't contacted me. But she said, and I just started crying in front of my computer. She said, every time I wrap him in the blanket, I'm wrapping him in my mother's love.
Ooh.
I was just, oh my God. Here I was thinking she hadn't liked the blanket because I hadn't heard from her. And in fact, the opposite was true.
Okay. Can't cry on TV. That is so powerful. It's so touching. Oh
yes.
Well, that kind of, I think that leads us into talking about what do people want when they ask you to make something? What is the finished product everybody seems to want? Or is there several things that people want? And we have some images of the baby blankets. That one on the left is a baby blanket, right? A stack of baby blankets.
The one on the left is the one I just spoke about.
Okay.
Yeah. And the one on the right is in fact a wall hanging. My photo of it is of it lying down. It's interesting. Some people know exactly what they want. So in the case of the baby blanket on the left, the aunt said to me, I want a baby blanket with my sister's clothes for her daughter. The one on the right, it wasn't clear what the family wanted. In this case, it was a woman asking me to make something for her daughter with the woman's mother's clothes, i.e. the granddaughter of the person whose clothes are in this item received it. There's a mohair jumper. There's a dancing skirt. It was an amazing silk skirt cut on the bias from the 1940s, wrap around. Some things I hate cutting up, but I have to ask 3 times, you know, are you sure you want me to cut this up? And so that skirt is in there. And then the granddaughter actually wove the pieces that are across the front. She came into my studio and chose the colours she wanted, and they're silk and some of the dancing skirt. Yeah. So it varies a great deal according. Some people are very clear. Other people go, I've arrived with the clothes. I don't know what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And so both are fine. I've had one client I've been working on and off with for 2 years because she's not really clear about what she'd like. And that's fine. You know, we keep coming back, and I've made her something for her as a sample, which at the time I made it, she went, oh, I don't know. I don't think that's quite right. And I showed it to her the other day because I had to ask her if I could put it in an exhibition in Sydney. And she said, oh, I love it. And it was like she didn't even know that she'd forgotten it completely. So sometimes people have different ideas over time as well. Yeah.
Well, I understand you have a process that you go through, and you've talked some about it today. With the family members before the weaving starts. Now we're going to show 3 different slides, and this is for Grandpa's Baby Rug Project.
Yes.
And if you could walk us through, what is this first slide?
Okay, so the first slide is 2 shirts belonging to the grandfather down the bottom of the image, and then about at the top of the image are the yarns that I originally thought that I would use in the project, that I thought would go with the 2 shirts that I was going to cut up and weave with. And then the second picture is my first, you know, wrapping around a piece of cardboard to look at how the colours went together. I subsequently decided not to use the 2 oranges. I actually did sampling in the oranges, but I didn't like it. And so I did one of the things I will do is sample for myself before I sample for my client, because I have to know how the fabrics look and feel when they're woven. As everyone who's a weaver knows, that there's a huge difference between looking at those 2 shirts, looking at them wrapped, torn like that, and then the next step. If you look on the right-hand picture, just the blue, I've actually mixed in some yarns with that blue T-shirt. And I do that quite often too, where if a piece of fabric looks a bit plain on its own, or it's perhaps very important to the client, but not fantastic to look at, I will add in yarns with that fabric when I weave with it as well. And then, so in these 2 on the right, on the left is my first sample for myself. And I just didn't like the way the orange looked, so I didn't put that in. And decided that having stripes of the shirt fabrics on the right interwoven with a very soft white lamb's wool was the way to go. So in terms of the weaving process, that's kind of like the design process. But
this also is the finished product, right here.
This image actually, it's just off the loom.
Okay.
There's, before I've washed it or finished it, on my website, I think there's a photo of the finished product. So that's the just off the loom look. But I also have a process with my client so for example, with my training myself with my volunteer clients, the first person came in with their clothes and sat down and started crying, and I didn't have a box of tissues. So my first learning was, you've got to have a box of tissues. I know it sounds absolutely basic, but this was part of my learning. And now I say to people, bring whatever clothes or fabrics or whatever you want woven with, and we'll just start where you start. And I always say, tell me about why you've chosen these clothes. So we mightn't even get to weaving until session 2 or 3. People vary a lot in terms of how much they want to talk about their own experience of losing someone or about the person who's died. Some people very much like, here's the fabric, here's the clothes, call me when you've finished, and don't want to discuss their feelings. So I'm very mindful to be open to whatever people want to start, wherever people want to start, not make any assumptions about that at all. And, you know, for some people, it's the final product that's really important. For other people, it's the process. And I'm very keen to kind of honour both options and everything in between.
Well, I think it's also important to state here is that you are a trained art therapist, so that if someone...
no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Okay.
No, I've, in my day job, before I retired, I was a coach and mentor.
Oh, okay.
And worked from a psychoanalytic perspective in organisations. So I've had a lot of psychological training of various sorts, but I wouldn't call myself an art therapist and don't have that qualification.
Well, at least you have an understanding of what they're going through, and, you know, some of the feelings that they're having and the struggles that they're having. The other question I have for you, do you ever have people that say, I want to do the weaving? I want you to set it up and I want to do the weaving. Do you ever do that?
I'm just trying to think. I've worked with someone who, did she weave? Yes, I think she did. Where she bought a jumper of her mother's. Her mother had spun the yarn and knitted a very complex ferrule jumper, and she took the jumper apart, and I gave her a little frame loom, I think, and she took that home and she wove this very, very tight little weave, and came back and she had a very sore neck because she'd been very sort of tight about it. And that was more of a process of talking about how her mother had been a very tight perfectionist person, and she was sort of transferring that into the way she was weaving herself. So that was much more of a psychological process. I've been working with someone recently who may be listening, who did some of the weaving and wove the pieces of fabric into the cloth that were the clothes that were important to her, and told stories about each of the different, there were 5 different sorts of fabric we were working with, and told stories of each of them while we were working together. And that was wonderful. I actually wish we'd recorded it, but I know she'll remember what she said.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Will you talk some about your oh no, I was curious, how did you come up, and you've talked about this some through this while we've been talking, but talk more about how did you come up with how you do this? I mean, did you do research on death and dying, you know, Kubler-Ross and all that, or and I know you worked some with your friends, but what else have you been doing to kind of hone this for yourself?
Yeah. I did a short course on working with people grieving with the Australian Grief and Bereavement Centre, and that was very good. I was thinking I'd really like to do more of that work. I think because of my own family history, where my mother died when I was 1, and I have a textile that she made. And when I was doing some work in therapy about my mother and my loss of my mother, so I've always had this sort of psychological bent. I did some work about this item. It's actually it's a satin handkerchief sachet. It's like a folded satin thing with lace around the edges and a little rouleau and a handmade covered button that she kept her handkerchiefs in. And I've still got handkerchiefs in it. But I did a little painting of it. And when I did the painting, I discovered she did those little, I don't even know what they're called, but those tiny little roses that people can embroider in squares on and sort of quilted squares. And when I did the little painting, I discovered that there was a pattern in the way she put these little flowers. There were 3 different colours. And I thought it was an incredible moment. I thought only my mother, who's now dead, and I know this was a pattern. And it was the first time I'd felt a really deep connection to my mother. And so I think that was one of the sort of like an unknown starting point, if you like, that for me, a textile linking me to my mother was very, very important, particularly when I realised that the pattern was something that was linking us. So I think that's part of it. I think I very much identified with my father and his role in the textile industry. And so I think that just the fact that I weave comes through from my relationship with him. So I think there are lots of strands that come into where I am now, that perhaps some of them I don't even realise myself at the moment.
Well, I want to go back to what you talked about earlier about designing. I think, especially all of us fiber people out here are curious about that too.
Yes.
We have a couple of slides about your design process. And would you talk some more about it? We've got some images here of like a watercolor that you've done. So do you do everything by hand? Do you use a computer? Do you ever just get on there and start weaving? Talk more about the design process.
Okay. I think so I love starting by watercolor. I don't know why, or drawing. It just kind of gets me into the mood, so to speak. So there's the little watercolor on the right. When soon after I met with a client with the clothes, I went away, and this is what I did as a starting point. And so at that point, I don't know how I'm going to weave it. But quite often I find just playing with watercolor helps me get into a kind of, what kind of look and feel are we going for here? So then, I did another one in the image on the left. I did another little watercolor. Then I start playing around with a weave design. The final one is not this. This was my design for sampling. And this is the part of the final product. So you can see the relationship, but it's not a precise one. So it's like, it's kind of an evolving, iterative process for me. And as I said before, how this is, by the way, just off the loom, so it hasn't been washed or finished yet. So it's not how the final will look. And I think I've learnt to trust this process. I said before that I have this feeling of, I don't know what I'm going to do with these clothes. I don't know how to honor them. And I certainly did with this project. But getting into it by drawing is my way. I always sample because I want my client to have confidence that they will get what they want. And in some cases, you know, my client might be a weaver or might be an interior designer or a graphic designer. And so they can have quite important ideas of their own about what they want the look and feel to be. And it's up to me to be able to translate that into a weave. And so that's where I play around quite a bit before I get something that I'm prepared to show the client too.
You've talked some about this partnership that you did with the Hong Kong University of Social Work about the issue of clothing and death. Would you talk some more about that?
Yes, so I was approached by Professor Amy Chow, who's Professor of Social Work at Hong Kong University, and she is an international expert in grief and end-of-life planning, palliative care. So she's an amazing person, and she was really interested in whether this weaving process could have an impact on people's grief. So she got a grant for a qualitative study. In Hong Kong, there's a big disability and aged care service where people with intellectual disabilities weave, and people who are elderly and blind also weave in the same organisation. So and they have a big social work capacity in this organisation who work with people who are grieving. So they recruited 20 clients who had lost a family member, and then they worked with them with family clothes, and the people with disabilities and the elderly people wove what the people wanted. And then we had a big final seminar where the person who was grieving, their social worker, and the person who did the weaving were all on the stage together. It was just magical. In one case, what was done was not weaving, but a jacket where the husband's sleeves were sort of round the middle of the jacket. So you could see that where the sleeves sat. And this woman was in her 90s, and she was just amazing. She'd been a maths professor. And she said, "My husband never hugged me in life. Now he has to hug me all the time." It was just amazing. So someone got a lovely cover for their family photo album. It was woven, and it had so you could fit the photo album into it. So they had all the family photos with the person who died, and then this thing with their clothes around it. And there was an exhibition. So it was a wonderful project. And it was qualitative research, but it clearly, and very small sample, but it did clearly show from the participants that they found that this had helped with their grief enormously. Yeah. So it was a great project to be involved in. I was very, very honoured.
Well, everybody I'd be seeing in chat them talking about this exhibit at Cornell. So these works that are coming up now are from that. It's called Life After. And it's at Cornell University, and I think somebody says at the Johnson Center. Is that correct?
I don't know. I tried to work that out myself, and I'm not sure. So if somebody knows, then that's probably right.
Okay. Anyway, it's at Cornell. If you go to their website, you can, go to their exhibits, upcoming exhibits, and current exhibits. Yeah. It will show you the information about this exhibit. But would you talk about the exhibit and your part in it? You've talked some about it already, but would you and this is the blanket, right? that you talked about?
Yes, the blanket's on the right.
Uh-huh.
And on the left is the first prototype I made in 2012. And I have called that He Was My Moral Compass, which he was, my partner. And that's got some of the furnishing fabric that I talked about from the dining chairs that I did in my very first little bit of stitching that set me on this trajectory. So that's in the exhibition, and so is the blanket. The exhibition is curated by a lovely young woman, Colette Jarrell, and she got a grant for this exhibition. And I haven't seen it, but I know what she's put up in relation to my works beside it. And she interviewed me and then used quotes from the interview. And I was like, did I really say that? Oh my goodness. So, yeah, I wish I could see the whole exhibition, but I'm sure it's really wonderful, because I just think she's got an incredible sensitivity to the issues around textiles, fashion and grief. And I think the name of the exhibition's wonderful, Life After.
Well, as a couple of people have talked about, they're going to go see it because they're in the area. So I hope they'll post pictures, and so everyone can see. That would be wonderful.
Yes, yes.
Well, what's next for you?
Well, I think I do want to do I really want to kind of deepen my practice, I think. I have, just to alert people, I'm about to mention something difficult. I have a client whose ex-husband suicided, and I already have the clothes she wishes me to work with. She's not ready for me to start work with her yet, and she wants something for herself and something for each of her daughters, who are his daughters. And that's something I haven't mentioned, that sometimes for people just to hand over the clothes to me somehow gives them an incredible sense of safety, that I haven't thrown them out, something's going to happen, they will be good, but it doesn't have to happen yet. So that will be, that'll be a very challenging project. And I think I'd like to do some more training before I'm back on that. And I'm also going to Florence and weaving with an American weaver, Pat Kinsella. Pat has a very low profile in terms of social media, but she's represented in the Cooper Hewitt Museum in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to do a course with her. She lives in Prato, which is the spinning and weaving kind of industrial centre in Italy, particularly for fashion woven fabrics. And the course is about weaving with loom waste and loom, selvages from ends of fabric. And I think that will be a really interesting experience in terms of more experimental approaches with using family fabrics too. So there are two things that, or three really, because I've got on my agenda. I should say the other thing is I only like to work with two people at a time, because I won't be rushed, and I like being able to really think about the person who died and think about the family clothes. I don't listen to podcasts or music when I'm weaving. Within these, if I'm weaving something for myself, I will, but I have a very strong position that my focus is this family, these clothes, the person who died, and not to be distracted from what comes up while I'm weaving. So I just think it's important that something gets woven in of respect for the family and the person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I've already been harassing you about coming to Convergence and teach.
You have.
I've repeatedly say she needs to do that. So everybody else chime in. I think we would love to hear more about what you do. And I would love to go to that conference in Italy. That sounds wonderful.
Yes.
See, and you could go learn all that and then come teach us. There you go. I've got it all planned out for you.
Thank you.
No, don't mention it. Okay, we have tons of questions. So why don't we hit some questions? And some of these are statements. I think you've hit a soft spot for a lot of people. Gail Dixon said, weaving with a mission, very compassionate. So, and some people have agreed with her on that one. And again, she said, I have a quilt made of my husband's grandfather's suits from the 1920s, a good way to stay connected to the family. Oh, that is. This is from Berna Lowenstein. She said, a friend of my dad's asked for my mom's fancy nightgowns after she died. A week later, the friend showed up with a teddy bear made from mom's nightgowns, and my dad kept it on the couch. It still smells like mom. Very comforting. Yeah. Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. I read this question earlier, Lynn. I've been thinking about some of the things we've said already. I've always wanted to cut up my wedding dress and weave something for my daughters. Do you have any suggestions of what I could weave with the material? And I thought about the book cover, you know, for the wedding, for their wedding pictures or family pictures. That would be good. What else would you suggest?
Well, that's really interesting. I'm actually this is where my own work gets put on the back burner. I'm currently weaving a wedding blanket for my daughter and her husband, and their baby's now 5 months old. You know, they've been married for a couple of years, so they might get it when they've got 3 children at this rate. But and I wondered about putting some of my wedding dress in it, but in fact, and my daughter's wedding dress, but she didn't want to cut it up. So I'm not weaving with the wedding dresses. But I've got mine. Mine's a lovely chiffon. I keep thinking I'd like to weave with this, but I haven't come up with anything myself. But I would say consult the family and see what they'd like, and then weave whatever they like.
Somebody just popped in here, ring bearer pillow. Yeah, if your family is, if the daughters aren't married yet, or they might be marrying soon, that's an idea too. So I think, Lynn, you two need to stay in touch. You and Mary should keep in touch and share ideas and then get back to us and let us know.
That would be lovely.
This is from Fazia Rizzi. Oh, this is a great question. What do you think was your most difficult project, either technically or emotionally?
That's a great question. I think the project where my client I mentioned has kept changing her mind about what she wants over a 2-year period, I've found very, very difficult. And it became clear that she wanted to be the weaver, but she didn't weave. And she wanted to weave something very grand and complex, with a book, the whole book torn up and woven with. And we were in a kind of, she's the one, she loves the thing I have woven that she'd forgotten about, so she will get that. And that might be where we finish, because I'm always keen that I finish well with people. That's the only time I've had someone where whatever we come up with, it's then not quite the right thing. I think sometimes with the young woman with the baby blanket, I had a sense at one stage that it was almost like nothing was going to be quite right. And I thought, it's almost like the blanket will bring her mother back, but she knows it won't. Oh. So the blanket won't be right, because nothing can put the world right. So I think sometimes the hardest thing I do is say, we have to go for something that's good enough, because this won't change things in the way you might wish that it will.
Well, we've had a couple of people ask about the warp. Do you also use the memory, the clothing and that kind of thing for your warp, or do you use something else?
No, I use something else. So I haven't said that. So the fabrics are kind of always embedded in other yarns, mainly woolen yarns.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a real magpie, if that's an expression that's understood by the listeners, where, you know, I like nothing better than to, you know, find an old cardboard box full of yarn, as long as the moths haven't got to it. So I use my stash, I suppose is a good way of putting it, and work out what colours and what yarns will go with the fabrics that I've got. Yeah, so definitely the warp is. I mean, I could warp with the fabrics if I thought about it and set it up, but I haven't ever done that. No.
So you use wool for the warp, or you use cotton or linen?
I've done both.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The wedding blanket I'm making for my daughter and her husband is they live in Brisbane, which is much hotter than where I am, and so that's cotton. And the torn up fabrics I'm using that are both of theirs woven together are all cotton as well.
We want to know, how do you oh, this is a good question. I never thought about this. Do you ever incorporate like the zippers and the buttons and things like that?
Yes.
You do?
I've in one project I was weaving with part of a coat, and I just loved the buttons. So, and this was for a bedspread. So I've actually got a row of the buttons from down the front of the coat in a row of the fabric. I haven't used zips at all, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't. It just hasn't come up. And I've also used the fringe of a picnic rug. The other thing I should mention is that when I thought about with my blanket for my daughter, the wedding blanket, I've got some of their dog's fur in that as well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And one of my other first projects was actually a scarf with fur from a dog that had died, and the fur was just being kept in a drawer, and it was lovely and white and sort of quite kind of hairy, and I didn't spin it, but I just sort of put bits of it into the scarf. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. They want to know, what kind of loom do you use?
Oh, look, when I'm on Instagram and I see all these people's wonderful brand new looms, and I think, well, maybe I should do this. But I think I'm such a, as I said before, magpie, that I've recently downsized from having a studio outside my home to studio at home only. So I've gone from 6 looms to 2, but they are old looms. I have never had a brand new loom. So I've now got a 4-shaft table loom that's probably 80 years old, I suppose. Wow. And my floor loom that I mentioned that I got when I was teaching occupational therapy students is from the mid-1940s.
Wow.
So it's what's called in Australia, it's a War Widows Craft Guild loom, which is also an irony in terms of my work. I think, did someone sit at this loom crying? The rather crazy idea was that women could make money by weaving after they became widows during the Second World War. But the looms are beautiful, and there are not many of them left in Australia. Yeah, so 2 old looms.
Deborah said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful work. Oh, somebody wants to know about the strips that you make out of the clothing.
Yes.
Do you have various widths that you do, or do you have a width that you like more than others?
It depends on the item I'm making entirely. So I suppose if I'm making a bedspread, I probably prefer, you think in inches, half an inch. But with something else, I might actually, like if I'm working with silk, like a silk scarf, for example, I might actually beat down on it quite heavily because the light catches it when it's scrunched up. So it really does depend, and also what the item is. With a baby blanket, I would weave much closer weave, so that it doesn't pull or catch on the baby's fingernails.
All right, Karen LeBlanc. Karen, I'm wondering about you. She said, this is a weird question, but do you believe you get messages from the other side? And if so, have you connected in some way with your partner and or some of the projects you've woven on?
That's a really interesting question.
It
Thank
is.
you.
Way to go, Karen.
I suppose my position, particularly in relation to my partner, is I have him within me, and I've internalized aspects of him. So one time something awful happened to me, actually on a Zoom session, like I had a fight with someone or something. It was really shocking. And it was like this voice came, I will mind you.
Oh.
But I would say it's internal, rather than actually from the heavens. I think when I'm weaving with people's clothes and cutting them up, I do get a deep sense of that person, especially if the clothes smell of the person.
I bet.
Which particularly women's clothes often have perfume in them. So I do feel like I get a really strong sense of the person and their personality. Often people give me a photo, and that helps me connect with the person too.
Oh.
Yeah. I was just thinking about it, like I'm aware of this idea of my own partner's voice, but when I'm weaving, I'm more focused on my client, who's the person who's alive.
Okay.
And connecting to them about their family member who's died. Yeah, so I don't think about talking with the person who's died, or I haven't. Maybe I will from now on after this question.
Oh, that's wonderful. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Yeah. Well, Karen, I can't believe we have to stop for today. This has been fascinating. This is one of these conversations I would love to go on forever. But thank you so much for coming on. I know it's bright and early for you over there. We appreciate it. It's just been wonderful. Now, I want y'all to know that the information about the exhibit at Cornell is in the chat. Her email is in the chat and some other information. People have been wonderful about adding that as we go. But if you are in the Cornell area, check it out. Go to their website and you can see more information about it. And I think you'll enjoy seeing it. Thank you so much. And I do want to thank our sponsor again. Oh, and here's Mary's website, wovenmemories.com.au. If you want to learn more about her. And it's really wonderful information on our website. It's fascinating. If you want to learn more about what she does, or if you want to contact her, you can do it that way also. I do want to thank our sponsor today, our Textiles and Tea angel, Barbara Decker. Thank you, Barbara. This is a powerful, touching Textiles and Tea. Thank you for sponsoring it today. We do appreciate that. If you want to be a sponsor, or your guild or your business, please go to the website at weavespindye.org and you can sign up to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea. And we would appreciate that. We have Convergence coming up. Can't believe we're working on this already. Next summer, July 11th through the 17th, and we are going to be in Wichita. Leader proposals are open. So if you want to apply to teach, Mary, you can do that now. You can go online, you fill out a form. It's much easier than it used to be. And you can put in all the information, all the different classes that you would like to teach. All the information's there. If you have any questions, you can always call us at the office. Be glad to help you. And also, if you're thinking about being a volunteer, keep that in mind. We are looking for people to be on the steering committees. If you would like to be involved in the kind of ground level of putting on a conference of this size, we'd love to have you be a volunteer. And you can find out more about that also online at weavespend.org/convergence. We have another big event coming up, Careers in Textile Symposium. This is really geared toward people who are out in the world working using their fiber degrees. Their fiber interest comes in handy. And we've tried to get a variety of different businesses, different careers that people have taken in textiles. So come check out this episode. It is free to students. We encourage our students to watch, and it's also free to HGA members. If you're not a student or an HGA member, you can sign up for $20 for the whole session. Again, you can sign up, and please do sign up at weavespend.org. We have, we want to thank everybody for sponsoring Textiles and Tea, but also supporting all of our programs. By donating to the Fiber Trust or becoming a member, you're helping us continue to offer programs like Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, Spinning and Weaving Week. All the things that we've been able to do over the last few years that have been added to our programming is because of the generous donations to the Fiber Trust and your membership, and we do appreciate it. Don't forget, if you want to go back and watch an episode again, you want to watch it with a friend, or you want someone that you know who might be interested in the topic to watch it, you can watch it on HGA's Facebook page, and you can also watch it on YouTube. I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube page, because then when a new episode is uploaded, you will get a notice and you'll know that it's there. Thank you all so much for joining us this week. Next week, we have Liz Spear. For those of you who are interested in sewing your handwoven, Liz Spear, that's your woman you need to listen to. She is next week. Hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Happy tea.